What is up, guys? Echo 5 here, and making my first YouTube video in, well, I guess it's been over a year. I used to make some videos on Magic content back when I first started streaming, but it started to feel like work, so I stepped away from the YouTube stuff and just focused on my time that I had available for Twitch. But this new program that I've been accepted into, it's the MTG Arena Content Creator Program, has some unique challenges, and one of those challenges is to create a deck building video on the format of my choice, and in doing so I earn you guys some game codes. So I'm taking a few minutes. I'm going to talk about deck building, and I'm going to do it in the format that we love most, limited. And it's going to be Theros Beyond Death that we talk about specifically. But the achievement is called Soul Guide. By doing this video, we unlock 20 game codes for the community, and we're going to be doing that, talking about Theros Beyond Death. So to start out with, I struggled a little bit in Theros Beyond Death Limited in the early days of the format. It was a little difficult for me to figure the format out compared to previous formats. What we ended up finding is that the games very frequently are very bomby, swingy, grindy games. Feels very much like Dominaria to me, and a lot of games are decided based on rares and mythics, unfortunately. The commons and uncommons, they matter, they're relevant, but when one of the more powerful rares or mythics hits the board, it feels like most of those commons and uncommons get outclassed very, very easily. And I had that same issue with Dominaria, and I know that I'm probably in the minority because most people tend to really love Dominaria, and I think if you really like Dominaria, you're probably really going to like Theros Beyond Death. But those formats, they tend to be very much bread formats. And what I mean by bread, it's the acronym used for pick orders. So the first letter of the bread acronym, B, stands for bombs. So you're going to take your bombs over everything. It's kind of a no-brainer, but it really, really matters in this format. Bombs being things like Dream Trawler, Kiorabest the Sea God, Shadow Spear, Nadir Kraken, Archon of Sun's Grace. There's a lot of them that I could think of, but these are cards that when you play them, they demand an immediate answer, or else you can kind of run away with the game, or your opponent can run away with the game if it's not answered very quickly. So we take those bombs first. The second letter of the acronym is R. That stands for removal. Removal is kind of king in this format because if games depend so much on these bombs swinging the game one way or the other, then it makes sense that removal would be the answer to those bombs, right? So if they land their powerful, creature, they got a Archon of Sun's Grace, and they're about to start making tons of Pegasus tokens, and you have the removal for it, well, then you're not in such a bad position. So removal is picked very highly if you're not picking a bomb. The next letter of the bread acronym, E, stands for evasion. So you want to take your evasive creatures very highly. These are things that with flying or unblockability, or maybe even menace to some extent, some trample, just ways to break through a board stall, or ways to sneak through those last few points of damage that you need. That extra reach. Then after E comes A, which stands for average or aggro cards. These are going to comprise the majority of your deck. These are your kind of the glue that holds your deck together, but are not super exciting. They're just there because you need to get to 40 cards minimum, and these are the cards that allow you to do that. And then lastly, D stands for the duds, the do-nothings. You really don't want many, if any, of these in your deck at all, but sometimes, unfortunately, in draft, we've all been there where we've had to run some pretty terrible cards because we just didn't get there. We had to pick up that last pick card that most of the time you just would never run. Sometimes you have to, but we try to avoid that. So that's kind of the bread acronym. That's what it's probably a pretty common way to draft, but in this format it really matters. Some formats kind of the bread acronym doesn't quite hold true. For example, we just came out of Eldraine, and a lot of decks in Eldraine, you would pass up bombs. Like, you didn't really need the bombs because your decks were near the end of the format on Arena. The decks were very aggressive. You went like mono white, mono red, mono green, very low to the ground, low curve. You weren't really looking for these top end bombs. You were just looking for the very powerful aggressive cards. So it was more of an aggro format than a bomb evasion removal format. So it's not always a bread format, but with Theros Beyond Death, it definitely is. Now, when we're talking about Theros Beyond Death, and we're considering the colors that you should look for in draft and deck building, when you're drafting your deck, my personal opinion on the power of the colors, and this is for Arena, mind you, I feel like black is the most powerful, and then just behind black, blue and white seem to be about evenly powerful, and then after those come green, and then last is red. And that may be because the bots on Arena, they tend to pick up the red cards earlier than they probably should, and they tend to pass the black cards later than they should. So that's why I feel like black is probably the most powerful and red's the least powerful. But you can certainly still draft those colors. When it comes to archetypes, I feel like it's harder to get some of the archetypes to come together properly because of the bot pick orders. But just from my own observance and results, the archetypes that tend to do best for me are definitely ones that contain black. And I would say Orzhov, Dimir, and Rakdos are probably the three best archetypes. So I would consider those like tier 1. Tier 2 archetypes would be probably like Azorius, Simic, and Boros. Boros is actually pretty good, maybe even tier 1. But those three are probably the tier 2. And then the tier 3 would be the remaining guilds. You know, Golgari, Izzet, Selesnya, Gruul. Those are all fine. You can draft those archetypes. They just tend to be a little less powerful overall than your tier 1 archetypes. So that's kind of my take on Theros from a color archetype perspective. And then when we get into deck building, just some general tips on deck building. If you're not very familiar with limited deck building, you usually want about 17 lands, and then with your remainder, you want about a 15 creature to 8 spell split. It doesn't always have to follow that, but you need minimum 40 cards, and usually you don't want to go above 40. Theros has kind of changed that a bit. There have been several decks that I've seen very high-level players playing with much more than 40 cards, and that's because Theros has kind of a self-mill theme that you can draft into, where you're milling yourself your own library intentionally to get value out of recursion and the new escape mechanic. So some decks can go up as high as 50, 54 I've seen. It doesn't always happen, and I would advise to stay away from that until you get very experienced with the format. So you want 40 cards, and with that breakdown, like I said, 17 land, 15 creatures, 8 spells is the general rule, but that could shift one way or the other. In a very aggressive deck, you may find yourself with a lot more creatures and very few spells. In a more controlling deck, you may find yourself with a lot more spells and very few creatures. Not all decks can skew one way or the other, so typically I would recommend, especially if you're new to draft, that you look at the split of 17 lands, 15 creatures, 8 spells. Get as close to that as you can. I have changed the land count up quite a bit. Definitely in Eldraine it was quite different, but in Theros I find myself running anywhere between 14 to 18 lands. And I want to note that this is very specific to Arena. You can't really get away with cheating lands very much in Paper Draft or Magic Online. But on Arena, in Best of 1, there is a hand smoothing algorithm, and it will allow you to kind of shave down some lands without being penalized too much by having to mulligan away hands that don't have land in them. Usually with the hand smoother, you're going to have 2 to 3 land in your opener most games, it feels like. So that said, with my monocolored decks, I have gone down to 14 land pretty frequently in mono white, mono black. And then in my decks that kind of have that top end, little top heavy, some bombs that I really want to draw into and I don't want to miss land drops, I will go up as high as 18 land. I had a Dimir deck that had Kiora, Best the Sea God, and Ashiok, and we went up to 18 land in that, and it did really well. So that's kind of in general deck building advice that I have. Here on the screen you see a deck that I've just drafted. It is a Dimir deck, and it does follow the recommended split. So we have 15 creatures, 8 non-creatures, and 17 lands. And kind of looking at the deck and how it came together, we first picked a Nightmare Shepherd, ended up in a very heavy black in pack 1, and then in pack 2 we kind of we're still prioritizing black, but we picked up a pretty late Devour of Memory in pack 2, and then we got like a Witness of Tomorrows, and then in pack 3 I think we picked up an Ichthyomorphosis, and just kind of rounded out the deck as best we could that way. Now this deck, we are running 17 land, and that's because we have so many 5-drops, but this deck, depending on how you end up building it, could be anywhere between 16 to 18 lands. Again, with Best of 1 and the hand smoother, I usually don't go up to 18, but I felt like 17 because we had so many 5-drops and a 6-drop was okay. Plus late game we have Witness of Tomorrows, we have Devour of Memory, we have some Mana Sinks, so I felt like that was okay. Looking at our removal, or our spells rather, we've got Mire's Grasp, Ichthyomorphosis, 2 Final Deaths, and then you can kind of count the Blight Breath, Catoblepas as well. So we have a decent number of removal spells, but when we're looking at our spells that aren't removal, we need to be very cautious, because those 8 slots can't be cluttered with things that don't immediately affect the board or immediately help you by killing off a creature or neutralizing a creature. Those cards that aren't removal are Omen of the Dead ×2, and a Starlit Mantle, and an Aspect of the Lamprey. And the reason why these are there, one, we didn't get any more removal. If we did, we would be probably cutting some number of these cards to add in the additional removal. But since we didn't get 8 removal spells, and we're looking at what we did get instead, we have ran the Aspect of the Lamprey for the discard, because in Theros, because it's a bred format, like we talked about, discard and counter spells tend to be a bit more powerful than usual, and if you can get your opponent down to 2 cards remaining in hand and you land an Aspect of the Lamprey, you're usually going to get 2 very good cards. So it's been quite nice. Also has the additional benefit of granting the creature lifelink, so it's a decent card. I usually wouldn't run more than 1 copy in a deck, and I even cut it pretty frequently if I have a good amount of removal. The other cards that we have a Starlit Mantle and 2 Omen of the Dead. The 2 Omen of the Dead are there because, well, the deck kind of has a game plan. We're trying to stall on the ground and win in the air. We have the Witness of Tomorrows, we have the Nightmare Shepherd, we have a Wave Rider, we've got a few 3-drop flyers, we have the Devourer of Memory that can be unblockable, we have the Grey Merchants that can kind of leech our opponent out late game. So we're basically trying to play a full evasion game, and we're using things like the Turtle and the Stinging Lionfish to kind of stall as much as we can, along with our removal. We have a Lampad of Death's Vigil, it's just really good at closing out games sometimes. And then the one of Underworld Charger. This card's not very exciting most of the time, but something unique to Theros is that the very first escape card you get has a lot of value. You really want 1 escape card in your deck, because it allows you to basically turn your graveyard into additional resources, and that's always really nice. We didn't draft any escape cards except for the Charger, so including it in the deck just feels like it's necessary. I usually try to run 2, even 3 escape cards sometimes, depending on what they are. But the first one has tremendous amount of value, more than the second, third. And the more escape cards you get, the less value they have, but we really want at least one, and that's why the Charger's in the deck. But that's kind of it. That's just a general overview of the deck I just drafted and kind of my thoughts on Theros Limited. So come hang out. I will include a link in the description below, and that link will take you to a video I did previously on how to calculate a mana base if you're curious on that, especially in 3+ color decks. It's a very good resource. I also put a link to my Twitch channel, so if you're coming from YouTube, come drop me a follow on Twitch, hang out, ask some questions. We pretty much only play limited, and we are now doing this content creator program, so if you hang out in the chat, you could earn some game codes. So that's why we're doing the video today. We're earning the community 20 game codes by doing this video and posting it. So come hang out, drop me a follow, and we'll draft together. Alright, that's it. That's all I got. Echo 5's out. Catch you later, wise guys.